The Great Hall was filled with nervous energy. 12 different alien species sat around a massive table that glowed with blue light. Their voices mixed together in a loud mess of sounds. Some clicked their mandibles, others hummed through their breathing tubes, and a few made sounds that no human ear could understand. Admiral Crick stood at the front of the room. He was tall and thin with gray skin and 4 arms that moved constantly as he spoke. His large eyes looked tired and worried. Behind him, a huge screen showed pictures of destroyed planets and burning space stations. "The Zephyrian swarms have taken 3 more star systems," Admiral Crick said. His voice was deep and sad. "Our fleets cannot stop them. Our weapons do nothing. They eat everything in their path and grow stronger." The alien delegates started talking, all at once. The insect-like Thrakari clicked their jaws loudly. The crystal beings called Vexians made bell-like sounds. The gas creatures known as New Lights changed colors rapidly, which was how they showed fear. "We need to evacuate all civilians from the outer rim," said Commander Zeta of the Thrakari. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. "These creatures cannot be stopped." "Evacuation will take too long," replied Counselor Vex 9, a tall crystal being whose body sparkled with internal light. "The swarms move faster than our ships. We need a military solution." "What military solution?" asked Admiral Crix, his forearms spreading wide. "We have tried everything. Plasma bombs, quantum torpedoes, even dimensional weapons. Nothing works. They absorb the energy and become stronger." In the back corner of the room, away from the main table, sat a single human. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison wore a simple blue uniform with few decorations. His brown hair was cut short, and his face showed no emotion. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, watching and listening to everything. The other delegates had almost forgotten he was there. Humans were new to the Galactic Defense Council. Their planet had only been discovered 5 years ago, and most aliens still thought of them as primitive. They had no advanced weapons, no faster-than-light travel of their own, and their technology was centuries behind everyone else. Morrison said nothing as the debate continued. He did not raise his hand to speak. He did not make any sounds or gestures. He simply sat and observed with dark, quiet eyes. "The Zephyrians are not just destroying planets," said Dr. Morquette, a slug-like creature whose skin oozed green liquid. "They are consuming everything. Metal, organic matter, even the atmosphere. They leave nothing behind but dead rock." "How do they reproduce so quickly?" asked another delegate. "Our scientists cannot understand their biology." "They do not reproduce," Admiral Crix replied. "They transform. Everything they consume becomes part of them. Every ship they destroy, every planet they eat, makes them larger and smarter." The room fell silent for a moment. The weight of this information settled on everyone like a heavy blanket. If the Zephyrians could turn everything into more of themselves, then the galaxy was doomed. "We should consider surrender," whispered a small furry creature from the Deltani system. "Perhaps they will spare some of us if we offer no resistance." "Surrender to what?" snapped Commander Zeta. "They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They only consume." Morrison shifted, slightly in his chair, but still said nothing. His eyes moved from speaker to speaker, taking in every word and gesture. Admiral Crix pulled up new images on the screen. They showed the aftermath of Zephyrian attacks. Planets stripped bare, their surfaces gray and lifeless. Space stations, twisted into impossible shapes. Their metal used to build something alien and terrifying. "The pattern is always the same," the Admiral explained. "They arrive in small groups, seeming almost weak. Our defenses easily destroy the first wave, but then more come, and more. Each wave is larger and more coordinated than the last. By the time we realize the true size of their forces, it is too late." "What about the humans?" asked Counselor Vex 9 suddenly. His crystal body turned toward Morrison. "They have not spoken. What does their species suggest?" All eyes in the room turned to the quiet human in the corner. Morrison looked up slowly, meeting each gaze with calm, steady eyes. The other delegates waited for him to speak, to offer some primitive but perhaps useful insight. Morrison looked at each alien face around the table, He saw fear, desperation, and confusion. These were advanced species with technology that seemed like magic to human eyes, yet they were paralyzed by an enemy they could not understand. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. He shook his head once, very slowly, and returned his gaze to his folded hands. The silence stretched on. Admiral Crix waited for Morrison to say something, anything. The other delegates began to whisper among themselves. Some seemed insulted by the human's silence. Others appeared confused. Well? Admiral Crix asked, his voice showing irritation. Do you have nothing to contribute? Your species asked to join this council. The least you can do is participate in our discussions. Morrison looked up again. His expression had not changed. He met Admiral Crix's four-eyed gaze and held it for a long moment. Then, without saying a single word, he shook his head again. Admiral Crix's secondary eyes narrowed with annoyance. Very well, he said, turning back to the other delegates. If the humans have nothing useful to add, we will continue without them. The debate resumed, but now it had a different tone. The aliens spoke more frantically, their voices higher and more desperate. Time was running out, and they all knew it. The Zephyrian swarms were growing stronger with each passing day. Morrison continued to sit in silence, watching everything. He noticed how each species reacted to stress. He saw how their fear made them think in short, desperate bursts instead of long-term plans. He observed their body language, their speech patterns, and the way they interrupted each other. Most importantly, he listened to what they were afraid to say out loud, that perhaps the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were not advanced enough to survive what was coming. As the meeting dragged on for hours, Morrison remained perfectly still and perfectly silent. Other delegates began to forget he was there, again. They argued about evacuation routes and defensive positions, about diplomatic solutions and last-ditch military strikes. None of them noticed that the human was not just listening to their words. He was studying them, learning how they thought, understanding how they made decisions under pressure. And in his quiet, patient way, Morrison was already beginning to see patterns that the others had missed entirely. 3 days passed after the emergency meeting. The Galactic Defense Council waited for reports from their scout ships and monitoring stations. What they received confused them more than anything they had seen before. Human ships were moving. Not military vessels, because humans barely had any real warships. These were cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels, and even small pleasure craft that rich humans used for vacation trips. They were scattered across space near the danger zones where Zephyrian swarms had been spotted. Admiral Crix stared at the tracking displays in his command center. Dozens of human ships showed up as small blue dots on his screens. They were not running away from the Zephyrian territories. They were moving toward them. This makes no sense, muttered Commander Zeta, who had arrived to review the strange reports. Her insect eyes studied the movement patterns. Are they trying to commit suicide? Perhaps they do not understand the danger, suggested Dr. Morquette. The slug-like scientist oozed closer to the display screens. Their species is young and primitive. Maybe they think they can fight the swarms with their basic weapons. But Admiral Crix was not convinced. He had dealt with many species over his long career. Young civilizations usually ran away from threats they could not understand. They did not move toward them in organized groups. Get me a communication link with the human vessels, he ordered his communications officer. Sir, we have tried. They respond to our calls, but they only give basic information. Flight plans, cargo manifests, standard safety reports, nothing about their real intentions. Admiral Crix felt a cold feeling in his stomach. Something was happening that he did not understand, and that made him very nervous. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Lydia Wells finished her morning research routine. She worked on Kepler Station, a small research outpost that studied alien biology. For the past week, she had been examining samples of Zephyrian tissue that had been recovered from destroyed ships. Her findings were disturbing. Dr. Wells was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She had spent 20 years studying alien life forms, but the Zephyrians were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were not truly alive in the way that other species understood life. They were something else entirely. She requested an emergency meeting with the Galactic Defense Council. Unlike most humans, Dr. Wells had a reputation among the alien species. Her research had helped solve several biological crises in the past, and even the proud Altarians respected her knowledge. 2 days later, she stood in the same great hall where Jake Morrison had remained silent. But Dr. Wells was not silent at all. She spoke clearly and calmly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "You have all been thinking about the Zephyrians wrong," she began. "You see them as a military threat that can be fought with weapons and tactics. But they are not an army. They are something much more dangerous." The alien delegates leaned forward to listen. Dr. Wells activated a holographic display that showed the microscopic structure of Zephyrian tissue. "These creatures do not reproduce like normal life forms," she explained. "They do not even truly die. Every piece of matter they consume becomes part of a larger network. Each destroyed planet becomes a node in a growing system." "We already know this," interrupted Commander Zeta impatiently. "They turn everything into more of themselves." "No, you do not understand," Dr. Wells replied firmly. "They are not just consuming matter. They are building a communications network that spans across space itself. They use quantum entanglement to connect every part of their collective consciousness." The room became very quiet. Several delegates exchanged worried glances. "What does this mean?" asked Counselor Vex-9. Dr. Wells manipulated the holographic display to show a map of the galaxy. Red dots marked the systems that had been consumed by the Zephyrians. Lines of light connected each red dot to the others. "It means that every planet they consume makes them smarter and more coordinated," she said. "Right now they are still building their network. But once it reaches a certain size, they will achieve instant communication across the entire galaxy. When that happens, every Zephyrian swarm will act as one mind." "How long do we have?" Admiral Crix asked quietly. "Based on their current expansion rate and the quantum signatures I have detected, I estimate 6 to 8 weeks before the network reaches critical mass." The weight of this information settled on the assembled aliens like a crushing force. 6 to 8 weeks before the enemy became truly unstoppable. "Why did you not share this information sooner?" demanded Dr. Morquette. "We could have prepared better defenses." Dr. Wells smiled, but it was not a happy expression. "You never asked the right questions," she said. "Your species all approached this as a military problem. You wanted to know how to destroy the Zephyrians. You never asked what they were trying to build." "And what are they trying to build?" asked Admiral Crix. "A galactic superorganism," Dr. Wells replied. "One that will consume every planet, every star system, every living thing until the entire galaxy becomes part of one collective consciousness." The aliens began talking all at once, their voices rising in panic, but Dr. Wells raised her hand for silence. "There is something else you need to know," she said. "Some discoveries require preparation time, complex preparation." "What kind of preparation?" Admiral Crix asked suspiciously. Dr. Wells looked around the room, her gaze stopping on each alien face. "The kind that humans are very good at," she said simply. Commander Zeta's mandibles clicked nervously. "What are your people doing out there? Why are human ships moving towards Zephyrian space instead of away from it?" "Because," Dr. Wells said, calmly, "running away from a problem has never been the human way of dealing with threats. We prefer to understand our enemies completely before we act." "You have a plan?" asked Counselor Vex-9. Dr. Wells nodded slowly. "We have had a plan since the first reports of Zephyrian attacks reached Earth. But plans require time to implement properly. They require patience and careful coordination." Admiral Crix felt that cold feeling in his stomach again. "What kind of plan?" "The kind that works," Dr. Wells replied. "But only if we are allowed to continue our preparations without interference." The alien delegates looked at each other uncertainly. They were used to being the advanced species, the ones with superior technology and knowledge. The idea that primitive humans might have solutions that they could not understand was both hopeful and frightening. How can we help? Admiral Crix asked finally. Dr. Wells gathered her research materials and prepared to leave. Keep doing what you are doing, she said. Hold your meetings, make your plans, try your conventional approaches, but do not interfere with human ship movements and do not ask us to explain everything we are doing. Why not? Demanded Commander Zeta. Dr. Wells paused at the door and looked back at the assembled aliens. Because some enemies can only be defeated by patience and preparation, she said. And some preparations work better when the enemy does not know they are being prepared for. With that, she left the Great Hall, leaving the alien delegates to wonder what the humans were really planning and why that planning required so much secrecy. Outside, human ships continued their mysterious movements through space, following patterns that made no sense to anyone except the humans themselves. Captain Roy Henderson stood on the bridge of his cargo ship, the New Horizon. He was a big man with rough hands and a gray beard. For 30 years, he had hauled freight between star systems. He knew space routes better than most people knew, the streets of their hometowns. But today was different. Today, he was not just moving cargo. He was part of something much bigger. His communication screen lit up with incoming messages. Other human ship captains were checking in from across the galaxy. Captain Susan Moore from the passenger liner Peaceful Journey. Captain Danny Wright from the mining vessel Rock Crusher. Captain Lisa Thompson from the luxury yacht Star Dancer. All of them carried the same type of cargo: industrial equipment, raw materials, and personal items from Earth. But hidden inside their cargo holds were other things. Special components that looked like ordinary machine parts but served a very different purpose. Roy, this is Susan, came a voice over the communication system. I am in position near the Vega system. My cargo is secure and ready for assembly. Danny, here, said another voice. Just finished my delivery run to the Centauri colony. The mining equipment is in place, but the real package is ready when you give the word. Captain Henderson smiled. The plan was working perfectly. For months, human ships had been moving these special components across the galaxy. Each piece was small and unremarkable by itself. But when they were all connected, they would create something that had never been built before. All stations. This is Roy, he said into his microphone. Continue standard operations. Remember, we are just ordinary cargo haulers doing ordinary jobs. Nothing special to see here. The other captains confirmed his message and signed off. But Henderson knew. They all understood the real meaning. They were not ordinary cargo haulers anymore. They were part of the most important mission in human history. Meanwhile, on a small farming colony called New Texas, Colonel Patricia Stone was teaching patience to civilians. She was a short woman with silver hair and intense green eyes. She had spent 20 years in the Earth military before retiring to help establish human colonies in space. Now she was back in uniform, but her job was not to fight. It was to prepare. Listen carefully, she told a group of colonists gathered in the main meeting hall. When the signal comes, you will know what to do. But until that moment, you must wait. How will we know when the signal comes? Asked Bill Santos, a farmer who grew vegetables in the colony's hydroponics domes. You will know, Colonel Stone replied simply. It will be unmistakable. But remember, timing is everything. Act too early and we fail. Act too late and we fail. The signal will come at exactly the right moment. The colonists nodded seriously. They had been having these meetings for weeks now. At first, many of them had been confused about why they needed to prepare for something that nobody would explain clearly. But they trusted Colonel Stone, and they trusted that the human leadership knew what they were doing. What about our children? Asked Mary Chen, a teacher at the colony school. Should they know about this? Children should be children, Colonel Stone said. They will be safe. That is all they need to know. Similar meetings were happening on human colonies throughout the galaxy. Not panic meetings or evacuation drills. Preparation meetings. Humans were teaching each other to wait, to watch, and to be ready for a moment that would come when the time was right. Back in space, the pattern of human ship movements was becoming clearer to those who knew how to look for it. But the alien species did not know how to look for it. They saw random cargo ships moving on normal business routes. They did not see the careful positioning, the precise timing, or the way each human vessel was part of a larger design. Captain Sarah Miller piloted her small research vessel, the Curious Mind, through an asteroid field near Zephyrian territory. She was officially conducting mineral surveys for the Colonial Mining Corporation. Her ship's scanners were active, recording detailed information about rock formations and metal deposits. But Captain Miller was not looking for minerals. She was studying the enemy. Every time a Zephyrian swarm passed through her area, she recorded everything: their movement patterns, their communication frequencies, their behavior when they encountered different types of matter. She was building a database that no other species had access to. Fascinating, she said to herself as she watched a group of Zephyrian creatures strip metal from a destroyed satellite. They are not just consuming randomly, they are selecting specific materials. Her observations were being transmitted to other human ships throughout the galaxy. Each captain was adding their own data to the growing collection of information about the enemy. The humans were learning things about the Zephyrians that the advanced alien species had never discovered. Dr. Marcus Webb worked in a small laboratory on Earth's moon. He was a quantum physicist who specialized in energy field manipulation. For months, he had been working on a project that seemed impossible to most scientists. He was trying to build a device that could interfere with quantum entanglement across vast distances. The calculations are extremely complex, he explained to his research team. We need to create a field that can disrupt quantum connections without destroying them completely. Too much interference and we just break a few links. Too little and nothing happens at all. His assistant, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, studied the equations on their computer screens. How do we know this will work on the Zephyrians? We do not know, for certain, Dr. Webb admitted. But Dr. Wells's research shows that their entire network depends on quantum entanglement. If we can disrupt that network at exactly the right moment, when it is at maximum capacity, the feedback should cause a cascade failure. And if we are wrong? Dr. Webb looked out the laboratory window at the stars beyond. Then the galaxy ends, and it will not matter that we were wrong. Meanwhile, the Galactic Defense Council continued their desperate meetings. They tried every conventional approach they could think of. Battle fleets were assembled and destroyed. New weapons were developed and proved useless. Evacuation plans were made and abandoned as impractical. Admiral Crix had stopped sleeping well. Every day brought news of more systems falling to the Zephyrian swarms. Every day the enemy network grew stronger and more coordinated. The humans are still moving their ships in those strange patterns, reported his intelligence officer. We have asked them to explain their activities, but they only give us standard shipping reports. Have they engaged any Zephyrian forces? Admiral Crix asked. No, sir. They avoid direct contact. When swarms appear in their area, the human ships move away, but they do not flee the region entirely. They just reposition themselves. Admiral Crix studied the tactical displays showing human ship positions. There was definitely a pattern there, but he could not understand what it meant. The humans were positioning themselves around Zephyrian territory like they were surrounding it, but with cargo ships and passenger liners, not warships. What are they planning? He wondered aloud. His intelligence officer had no answer. None of the alien species could figure out what the humans were doing. Their ships carried no heavy weapons. Their movements followed no known military doctrine. Their positioning made no tactical sense according to any strategic computer analysis. But the humans kept moving, kept positioning, kept preparing for something that only they understood. Commander Lisa Park arrived at the council chambers for another emergency session. She was a human psychologist who had been quietly observing the alien decision-making process for weeks. Unlike the other human representatives, she was authorized to speak freely about certain aspects of human planning. When the aliens demanded to know what her species was doing, she stood calmly and gave them an answer that chilled them more than any Zephyrian threat. We are doing what humans do best, she said in a quiet voice that carried clearly through the Great Hall. We are being patient predators. The alien delegates looked at each other nervously. They had never thought of humans as predators before. Humans seemed so peaceful, so cooperative. so willing to learn from more advanced species. What does that mean? Asked Admiral Crix. Commander Park smiled, but like Dr. Wells before her, it was not a warm expression. It means we hunt differently than you do, she said. You try to overpower your enemies with superior technology and firepower. We study our prey until we understand them better than they understand themselves. Then we wait for the perfect moment to strike. And when will that moment come? Asked Counselor Vex 9. When the time is right, Commander Park replied, and not 1 second before. The Zephyrian network reached critical mass on a Tuesday. Dr. Lydia Wells watched her monitoring equipment from Kepler Station as the readings suddenly spiked beyond all previous measurements. The quantum entanglement signatures that connected the Zephyrian swarms across 17 star systems suddenly synchronized into one massive unified pattern. It has happened, she said quietly into her communication device. The network is complete. Across the galaxy, human observers at dozens of monitoring posts confirmed the same readings. The enemy had achieved what they had been building toward for months. Every Zephyrian swarm, every consumed planet, every piece of transformed matter was now part of one giant consciousness that could think and act instantly across half the galaxy. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Zephyrian attacks that had previously been random and uncoordinated suddenly became perfectly timed military operations. Swarms that had been moving slowly began accelerating toward their targets with frightening precision. Defense fleets that had been holding defensive positions found themselves surrounded by enemies that seemed to know exactly where they would be. Admiral Crix watched in horror as his tactical displays showed the new reality. The scattered Zephyrian forces were no longer scattered. They were parts of one enormous military machine that could coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously. All fleet commanders report the same thing, his communications officer said with a shaking voice. The enemy knows our positions before we take them. They anticipate our movements before we make them. It is as if they can read our minds. How long before they reach the core worlds? Admiral Crix asked. At their current speed and coordination level, perhaps 72 hours. Admiral Crix closed his 4 eyes and tried to think. 72 hours before the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy would be consumed by an enemy that had become too intelligent and too coordinated to fight. That was when the humans struck. Captain Sam Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his mining vessel, the Iron Will. It was an old ship with a beat-up hull and equipment that needed constant repair. Under normal circumstances, no military commander would consider it a weapon of war, but these were not normal circumstances. All stations, this is Rodriguez, he said into his communication system. Execute Operation Patience. Repeat, execute Operation Patience. Across the galaxy, every human ship received the same message at exactly the same moment. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, research vessels, mining ships, and even small private craft all activated systems that they had been carrying for months. The components that had been carefully positioned throughout space suddenly came online. Devices that had been disguised as ordinary industrial equipment revealed their true purpose. The quantum field generators that Dr. Webb had designed began creating interference patterns that spread outward at the speed of light. Captain Rodriguez watched his instruments as the field activated. The readings were unlike anything he had ever seen. Waves of quantum interference spread outward from thousands of different points simultaneously, creating a network of disruption that covered half the galaxy. The effect on the Zephyrians was immediate and devastating. The quantum entanglement connections that allowed instant communication across their network began to fail. Not all at once, but in a carefully calculated cascade that turned their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Zephyrian swarms that had been acting as one unified force suddenly found themselves cut off from the central consciousness. Individual clusters that had evolved to function as parts of a greater whole began making independent decisions that contradicted each other. Dr. Sarah Kim watched the results from her research station near the Proxima system. She was a behavioral scientist who had spent months studying how the Zephyrians made decisions when they were disconnected from their network. The isolated swarms are reverting to their base programming, she reported to the human command structure. Without central coordination, they are attacking whatever is closest to them, including other Zephyrian swarms. The quantum interference field had done more than just break communication between the swarms. It had turned the Zephyrian network against itself. Clusters that had been cooperating perfectly began treating each other as enemies. They attacked their own infrastructure, consumed their own resources, and destroyed the very network nodes that they had spent months building. Admiral Crick stared at his tactical displays in amazement. The Zephyrian forces that had been advancing in perfect coordination were suddenly attacking each other. Swarms that had been working together to strip planets were now fighting over the same materials. "What is happening?" he asked his science officers. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors detect massive quantum interference throughout Zephyrian space, but we cannot determine the source." But Admiral Crix was beginning to understand. The timing was too perfect. The interference had begun at exactly the moment when the Zephyrian network reached maximum vulnerability. This was not a natural phenomenon or a lucky accident. "Get me a communication link with the human ships," he ordered. When the connection was established, he found himself speaking to Captain Rodriguez aboard the Iron Will. "Captain, what have you done?" Admiral Crix asked directly. Rodriguez looked tired but satisfied. "What we had to do, Admiral. What we have been preparing to do for the past 18 months. 18 months, but your species only learned about the Zephyrians 6 months ago." "No, sir," Rodriguez replied calmly. "We learned about them 18 months ago. We just did not tell anyone else until we were ready to act." The implications of this statement hit Admiral Crix like a physical blow. The humans had known about the Zephyrian threat for over a year before any other species. They had been planning their response since the very beginning. "Why did you not warn us sooner?" he demanded. "Because warnings would not have helped," Rodriguez answered. "You would have tried to fight them immediately with conventional weapons. You would have forced them to adapt and become stronger. We needed them to complete their network first. You wanted them to become more dangerous? We needed them to become vulnerable," Rodriguez corrected. "A network that connects everything is also a network that can be broken at exactly the right point, but only when it reaches maximum capacity." Admiral Crix realized what the humans had done. They had not just been studying the Zephyrians, they had been waiting for them to build the very thing that could be used to destroy them. Colonel Patricia Stone stood in the command center on New Texas Colony, watching reports come in from across the galaxy. The quantum interference field was working better than even the most optimistic projections had predicted. "Zephyrian forces in the Vega system are in complete disarray," reported one of her communications officers. "They are consuming their own command structures." "Andromeda sector reports similar results," said another officer. "Enemy swarms are attacking each other instead of our defensive positions." Colonel Stone nodded with satisfaction. The patience she had been teaching to colonists throughout human space was paying off. Every human ship captain who had waited for the signal, every colonist who had prepared without knowing why, every scientist who had worked on the project without seeing the complete picture had played their part perfectly. "How long until complete network collapse?" she asked her technical team. "Estimated 4 to 6 hours until total system failure," replied Dr. Webb over the communication link from his lunar laboratory. "The cascade effect is accelerating faster than our models predicted." "And the Zephyrians?" "Without their network coordination, they are reverting to primitive survival behaviors. They will continue to exist, but as individual swarms with no central intelligence. They will be manageable threats instead of a galactic extinction event." Colonel Stone smiled. For the first time in months, the plan had worked. The patient predators had chosen their moment perfectly, and the galaxy would survive. Captain Rodriguez continued monitoring the quantum interference field from his position in space. Around him, other human ships maintained their positions, keeping the field stable while the Zephyrian network tore itself apart. "All human vessels, this is Rodriguez," he announced over the communication system. "Mission accomplished. The network is collapsing ahead of schedule. Maintain field integrity for another 6 hours, then we can begin shutdown procedures." He leaned back in his captain's chair and allowed himself a moment of relief. For 18 months, he had carried the weight of knowing that the galaxy's survival depended on perfect timing and absolute patience. The humans had waited. They had watched. They had learned. And when the perfect moment finally arrived, they had struck with devastating precision. The Zephyrian threat was over, not because humanity had superior weapons or technology, but because they had superior understanding of when and how to use the weapons they had built. The Galactic Defense Council gathered 1 week after the Zephyrian network collapsed. The Great Hall looked the same as before, but everything felt different. The panic was gone. The desperate voices had been replaced by quiet, careful conversations. The alien delegates sat in their usual places around the glowing table. But this time, they all kept looking toward the back corner, where Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison sat in his simple blue uniform. Morrison was no longer silent. "The human approach to warfare is different from yours," he said, speaking clearly to the assembled aliens. "You fight with superior technology and overwhelming force. You try to win battles quickly and decisively. This works well against most enemies." Admiral Crix leaned forward to listen. His forearms were folded tightly across his chest. "But not against the Zephyrians?" "The Zephyrians were not an enemy that could be defeated with quick victories," Morrison replied. "They adapted to everything you threw at them. Every weapon you used made them stronger. Every battle you won taught them how to fight better." Commander Zeta clicked her mandibles nervously. "So how did you know how to defeat them?" Morrison stood up slowly and walked to the front of the room. For the first time since joining the council, he took a position where everyone could see him, clearly. "Humans are persistence hunters," he said. "We evolved on a planet where we could not run faster than our prey or fight stronger predators with brute force, so we learned to outlast them instead." He activated the holographic display and showed images of Earth's ancient history, humans chasing animals across vast distances, humans tracking prey for days or weeks until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. "We do not win by being stronger or faster," Morrison continued. "We win by being more patient. We study our prey until we understand them completely. Then we wait for the moment when they are most vulnerable." Dr. Morquette oozed closer to the display. "You studied the Zephyrians for 18 months?" "We began studying them the day our deep space monitoring stations detected their first attacks," Morrison confirmed. "But studying and understanding are different things. We needed them to reveal their complete nature before we could find their weakness." "Their weakness was their network," said Counselor Vex 9. "No," Morrison corrected. "Their weakness was their dependence on that network. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, but you have to wait until the chain is fully built before you can break it effectively." The alien delegates began to understand what had really happened. The humans had not just waited for the right moment to attack. They had waited for the Zephyrians to create the very thing that would destroy them. General Karen Murphy entered the hall and walked to stand beside Morrison. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Unlike Morrison, she wore a uniform with many decorations that showed her high rank in the human military. "The quantum interference field was designed 18 months ago," she announced to the assembled council. "But we could not use it until the Zephyrian network reached critical mass. If we had acted too early, some swarms would have survived and adapted to our countermeasures." "You let them become stronger on purpose?" asked Admiral Crix, his voice showing disbelief. "We let them reveal their complete strategy," General Murphy corrected. "Every planet they consumed, every ship they destroyed, every adaptation they made gave us more information about how their system worked. We needed to see the finished network before we could design a way to break it." Commander Zeta stood up, abruptly. "You risked the entire galaxy on a plan that might not have worked." General Murphy met her gaze calmly. "Every war is a risk. The difference is that we calculated our risks based on complete information instead of acting on fear and incomplete data." She walked to the holographic display and brought up tactical analyses showing the results of the human operation. "If any other species had tried to fight the Zephyrians with conventional weapons, you would have lost," she said bluntly. "Your technology was advanced, but it was not designed to fight an enemy that learned and adapted from every attack. What makes human technology better? Asked Dr. Morquette. Nothing, General Murphy replied. Our technology is primitive compared to yours, but our strategy was designed specifically for this enemy. We spent 18 months learning how they thought, how they communicated, and how they made decisions. Morrison returned to the display controls and showed detailed charts of Zephyrian behavior patterns. We discovered that the Zephyrians were not truly intelligent in the way that biological species understand intelligence, he explained. They were more like a very advanced computer program. They followed logical patterns that could be predicted and manipulated. Once we understood their programming, we could design situations that would cause them to make mistakes. General, Murphy added, the quantum interference field did not just break their communications, it forced them to revert to basic survival programming that made them attack anything nearby, including each other. Admiral Crix was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was troubled. Your species planned this entire operation without telling any of us. You watched us panic and make desperate plans while you already knew how to solve the problem. Yes, Morrison said simply. Why? Why did you not share your knowledge with us? General Murphy and Morrison exchanged glances. It was Morrison who answered. Because you would not have let us wait, he said. You would have demanded immediate action. You would have tried to modify our plan to include your own strategies. You would have rushed the timeline and ruined everything. We might have been able to help, protested Counselor Vex 9. Help with what? General Murphy asked. Building quantum interference generators? Your species do not have the right kind of technology. Coordinating ship movements across the galaxy? Your military doctrines are not designed for that kind of patience. She gestured toward the alien delegates. Each of your species is more advanced than humanity in many ways, but none of you think the way humans think. None of you hunt the way humans hunt. Morrison walked back toward his corner seat, but stopped before sitting down. There is something else you need to understand, he said quietly. This was not the only threat we have been preparing for. The room became completely silent. Every alien delegate stared at Morrison with sudden fear. What do you mean? Admiral Crix asked carefully. We mean that the Zephyrian crisis taught us something important about galactic threats, General Murphy replied. There will be other enemies, other challenges that require long-term planning and strategic patience. And you are preparing for them? Asked Commander Zeta. Morrison sat down in his corner chair and folded his hands in his lap, just as he had done during that first briefing weeks ago. We are always preparing, he said calmly. That is what humans do. We watch, we learn, we plan, and we wait for the right moment to act. The alien delegates looked at each other nervously. They had thought they were gaining a useful ally when humanity joined the Galactic Defense Council. Now they realized they had gained something much more significant and much more dangerous. They had gained a species that treated warfare as a form of applied psychology rather than applied physics. A species that studied enemies for years before acting. A species that could wait patiently while others panicked, then strike with devastating precision when the moment was perfect. Admiral Crix approached Morrison after the formal session ended. Your silence during that first briefing, he said quietly. You already knew everything, did you not? You already had your plan. Morrison looked up at the tall alien commander. We have been planning since the first deep space sensors detected unusual activity in the outer rim, he confirmed. But plans require the right moment, and the right moment requires patience. What else are you planning for? Admiral Crix asked. Morrison's expression remained perfectly neutral. Everything that might threaten the galaxy, he said simply. Everything that might require the kind of response that only humans can provide. Admiral Crix felt that familiar, cold feeling in his stomach. Are there other threats we should know about? There are always threats, Morrison replied. The question is not whether they exist. The question is whether you will be ready when they reveal themselves. The Admiral walked away, leaving Morrison sitting quietly in his corner. Around the galaxy, human ships were returning to their normal routes. Human colonies were resuming their daily activities. Human scientists were filing their reports and beginning new research projects. But Morrison knew, and General Murphy knew, and every human involved in Operation Patience knew that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The galaxy had learned that humanity was not just another member species of the Galactic Defense Council. They were the species that other species called when conventional solutions would not work. They were the patient predators who hunted threats that others could not even see. And they were always watching, always learning, always preparing for the next moment when patience and precision would be the only thing standing between civilization and extinction.